Hi everyone, Mitch here again with the 1925 Ford Model T. This video we're going to be swapping out the starter motor. Yep, she's finally burnt out her field windings, so it's time for a replacement. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Okay, now the first step before we go anywhere near the starter motor is we need to disconnect the battery so that we don't get any unexpected surprises when we start undoing cables and things. So that's what we'll do now. We'll get this battery disconnected and then we'll start on the starter motor. Okay, so as I said, we're going to take the battery off first. Now what we'll do first, we'll take the negative terminal off first. That way if I go touching ground accidentally when I'm undoing the positive, nothing's going to happen. So we'll undo the negative first. So I turn it the right way. Should be able to do that by hand actually. There we go. It's going to need a little bit of persuasion. It hasn't been off in a while. Very gently. There we go. Right, that's the negative terminal off. And now we'll grab the positive. Oh, I forgot that spanner doesn't fit that one. Never mind, we'll cheat and we'll use a shifter. There we go. Okay, so now you can see we've got the battery disconnected, so now we can commence work on the starter motor. Okay, so as you can see, the box is still unopened, so we're actually going to get a look at this new starter motor for the first time. Literally, I haven't opened this box at all, so we've got a nice new sharp blade here, so we'll start to open up. Whoever sealed this box did a very good job. This has come all the way from Gloucester, Massachusetts, so quite a long way from where I live in Australia. Right, let's see what we have in this UPS package. Oh, and it appears that they've double boxed it, so that's good. You're well protected. Okay, put the knife down. Oh, I can even have a read of the what's it called? The Entertainer. Is that the name of the publication? Yes, The Entertainer, Friday, January 25th, 2019. Have a read of that later. What do we got here? Market basket, more for your dollar. Now that's something we should do here in Australia actually, is use more recycled paper bags, but there you go, that's there we go. There's what we've been waiting for. Oh, look at that. That's what we've been waiting for right there. Nice replacement starter motor for my Model T. And I have been assured that it's been completely rebuilt and in good working condition. So, let's go ahead and get the old one out, give this one a try out, and we'll get this one in. Okay, so here we are in the bowels of the Model T, and you'll see I've got my trusty work light literally hanging over the spark advance lever up there. Very sophisticated, I know. So basically what we're going to do now is get the bendix cover off. Now the more perceptive of you may have noticed there is an additional component on the bendix cover here which is not a standard Model T item. It is in fact the switch for a brake light that I fitted a few months ago, which has proven to be very, very beneficial for safety. Now, technically speaking, I should probably take that switch off of the bendix cover, but we're going to cheat today. We don't actually have to do it. because all we're aiming to do is to actually undo the screws that hold the bendix cover itself in place. So there's one there on the top, there's one on each side, and if I remember on the bottom, I'll try and get the camera down there to show you. This is very tricky. Oh look, yep, sure enough. There is a screw on the bottom of the bendix cover as well. So there's 4 screws holding the bendix cover on the back of the starter motor. Now, the reason we need to take the bendix cover off, we actually need to remove the bendix gear from the starter motor before we try and remove it. If we try and pull the starter motor out while leaving the bendix gear in place, it's going to ruin the field windings on the magneto, and I'll show you what I mean once we've actually got the starter motor out. I'll show you how close it actually sits to the magneto inside the bell housing there. So without further ado, let's grab a flathead screwdriver and start undoing these screws, taking care not to drop them into the oil pan that's sitting under the car. We might actually slide that out of the way, I think. Alrighty, let's get started with those screws. Okay, now I've opted to film this particular video with the GoPro because it's a very small camera and it allows me to sit it really close to where I'm actually working. So it's actually sitting on the chassis rail just behind the starter motor itself, sorry, behind the bendix cover. So it allows me to sit it nice and close so that I can get you riding close to the action of what I'm actually doing. So there's the top screw out. We'll put that somewhere safe. There's one. We'll try and get this one in the side here next. You probably won't be able to see this one, but I'm just gotten into the screw that's next to the bendix cover. And now I've got to try and get my fingers in there to get it out before it falls on the floor. Actually, probably, given the circumstances and how close quarters it is in here, it might actually be easy to let it fall on the floor. Let's see if we can rescue it before it falls. Come on, out you come. Got it. There we go. That's that one. And now we'll grab the one on the side. And I've got a feeling the camera might be in the way for this one. Let's have a go. Oh, I can just about get to it. But I think I will move the camera, otherwise it's going to end up in the oil pan. Okay, it's at this point that I realise that I should perhaps slip into something more sexy. I think my wife would kill me if I came back inside with my good shirt covered in oil. So, my super sexy overalls on. Now I can crawl under the car and get that bottom screw out. Okay, so here we are underneath the Model T, and we've just got one more screw to get off the bendix cover here, which is on the bottom. And actually, we're not even going to undo this one fully. All we're going to undo is undo it part way, so that you can see the bendix cover is actually still resting on it, but it's not going to fall off because that screw is still holding it. But it's just loose enough that it's holding the cover there, but it's not going to fall off. So now we'll get back up the top and take the cover off and have a look under the inside. Okay, so it's at this point that we're now ready to remove the bendix cover. So let's see if I can hold the camera steady with one hand and carefully lift the cover off with the other. You should be able to get that clear of the brake linkages. There we go. And that's the bendix cover out of the way, like so. And here we can see the bendix gear itself. Now comes the fun bit. What we actually have to do, we've got a spring-loaded setup here, which we need to remove. Otherwise, we're not going to get the starter motor out at all. Okay, so the next step is to remove this bolt here, which actually holds the bendix gear on the starter motor shaft. Now the first thing we have to do, if you look carefully, you can probably just about see it, this little metal tab on the side here, which is actually designed to stop this bolt from backing out. So what we've got to gently do is bend that away from this bolt so that we can undo it. Easiest way to do that is with a screwdriver, but I can't stress this enough, do it very gently. I might even need something to tap that screwdriver in there because it is quite stiff. So we'll grab a small hammer and we'll gently tap that out of there. Okay, so we'll get that in there. And we'll give that a gentle tap. And that looks like it's almost moved out enough. What we might do, once we can get in there, we might just get a small pair of needle nose pliers, or just pliers, and gently bend that out of the way, but we have to be gentle because we can't afford to snap that off. And that seems to be just about moved out the way enough. So let's see if we can get a spanner in there and get that bolt undone. Okay, so I've found a spanner that will be suitable. Now, strictly speaking, this is a 1/2 inch bolt, but if you're using metric, then your closest will be 13 millimeters. So I actually need to swap hands here. Excuse my camera work, and we'll get this carefully undone. Oops. Get it over the bolt. There we go. So I'll just pause the video while I get this bolt undone, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so basically we've got this bolt loose now. There we go, that's completely out now. We'll pop that out, like so, taking care not to lose the washer that goes with it. So we'll keep those safely together. The next step is to remove the bendix gear from the starter motor drive shaft. Now what we have to take extreme caution with here, and I'll show you on the new one, might be easier. There is a keyway and of course the key to go with it, which keeps everything locked properly on the shaft. And that particular key that goes in there is really, really tiny. And if you lose it, we won't be able to use the starter motor at all. So I'll show you the keyway on the new starter, and then we'll go ahead and we'll gently get this one off. So as you can see here, there's the slot where the key goes. That's your little keyway there. But more importantly, if you look at this hole here, this is where the end of that bolt that I was just undoing, that's where the end of it actually nestles into the top of the shaft there. So what we're actually doing, the key will actually be on the side of the shaft. So what might be a good idea first is to actually rotate the starter shaft so that hole is on the side where we just took the bolt out. Make sure it's on the side so that this key is on top, and that minimizes the risk of us losing the key when we slide the bendix gear off the shaft. So let's go back to the starter motor, the old one, and we'll carefully start the removal process. Okay, so what we're actually going to have to do is very carefully turn the bendix gear anti-clockwise, a 1/4 of a turn, so that our key actually sits up on the top. And if you look carefully, it gives it away on the side, on the end there. You can see the notch in the end there where the key actually goes. So we need to give this a 1/4 turn anti-clockwise so that the keyway is on top. That way we minimize the chances of losing that little key when we take the bendix gear off. We still have to be very careful though. So what I'll do now is hand. Okay, so this little guy here is what we just very carefully pulled off the end of the starter motor shaft. This is what locks everything onto the shaft, the whole bendix gear. So that's been carefully removed, and now if we look very carefully, you can see the tiny little key that I was talking about. Hopefully the camera will stay in focus. Get something to point to it with. So basically this tiny little piece of metal in the top here, this tiny little key, that's what keeps everything from spinning around freely on the shaft basically. And it's that little guy that we simply cannot afford to lose. So we're going to be very careful with a pair of fine pliers and gently remove that so that we can actually get the rest of the bendix gear off the shaft. So that's what we'll take off next, is that tiny little key there. But we have to be very careful. Okay, so what you can see in the palm of my hand here is that tiny little key that I just pointed out, a tiny semicircular piece of metal that fits into that shaft and keeps everything locked tightly in place. So this little guy, we must keep this safe because it definitely has to go back in when we put the new starter in. So let's put this somewhere safe, and then we'll proceed with removing the rest of the bendix gear from the old starter. Okay, now hopefully my hands don't get in the way of you seeing what I'm doing next. Is actually removing the remainder of the bendix gear from the starter motor shaft, and it should simply just slide straight off. Might have to jiggle it a little bit. It is on there quite snug, but that should just slide off in one piece like so. And that's the bendix gear. That's what actually throws into the when the starter motor starts, it actually throws this section here down into the there we go, throws this section down in and onto the flywheel to turn the engine over to start the engine. So we'll pop that to one side for now, and we are now actually ready to begin removing the starter motor itself. So I'll pop that somewhere safe and we'll move on to the next bit. Okay, now as I said, the next job is of course the removal of the starter motor itself, but before we can do that, we need to remove the positive wire here from the top of the starter motor. That needs to be, we need to undo this nut here, take that lead off, and then we can begin to undo the anchor bolts which hold the starter motor onto the bell housing, or the hogshead I should say. Alright, so that is the next step, to remove. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get this lead off the top of the starter motor, so we'll undo this nut here. You might have noticed that appeared to come undone somewhat easily. I had to wrestle with it before I actually started filming this particular scene. So, but the good news is we've actually got the nut to, whoop, and I've dropped it, but it's okay, it's sitting on the side of the motor, that's fine. There we go. Okay, so we'll get the lead off. And it doesn't matter really where we sit it, because as we did before, the battery has been disconnected. Right, so that's the contact undone there. So now we can go ahead and start undoing the bolts which hold the starter motor on, and then we need to carefully draw the starter motor out. So we'll start with these. This one closest to us, it's nice and easy to get to. There's number one. And then get this one in the back here. What I'll do is I'll slacken it off, and then I will, there we go, that's nice and slack. Oop, and I'll bump the camera. I do apologise for that. Bear with me while I slide under the car and undo the bottom ones. So now undoing the two bolts at the bottom of the starter motor. They're nice and easy to get to. One of the things I really enjoy about the Model T Ford is that they're so easy to work on, and everything about them is readily accessible. One more bolt to undo underneath. It's coming out nice and easily. Not putting up a fight at all, that's good to see. Okay, that's the two bottom bolts out. Okay, don't worry, I'm still here. So the starter motor is actually wobbly now. I've just got this one more bolt on the top just to finish undoing. I do actually need to hold the starter motor up in order to undo this bolt. Now, just before I undo it the rest of the way, because the starter motor will drop down, let's move that nut somewhere safe. What I will do is move the camera to a safer location so that you can see me actually taking the starter motor out. Right, now It is a little bit of a fiddly process to remove it, but quite straightforward. Okay, so what I've done is I've moved the work light back over here, and the camera, which was sitting just here just before, we've moved that up on top of the front mudguard. So what we'll do is we'll finish undoing this back bolt over here, and then we'll be ready to remove the starter motor itself. There. So I'll just finish undoing that one. And I should be able to do that the rest of the way by hand. It's already loose. Yep, there it comes. There we go. Okay, now the starter motor is free, so now it's just a case of very gently pulling it out, taking care not to bump it on anything on the way through. Just bring it back a little tiny bit like that so I can get my hand around the shaft. And there she is. I'll just lower that down to the ground because I can't actually pull it up past the mudguard. There we go. Okay, so if you observe very carefully through the starter motor hole, hopefully I'm not covering the light up, this part here is the back of the magneto, and if you look a bit further in, you can see the teeth there at the end of the screwdriver. Those teeth is the flywheel where the starter motor, where the bendix gear actually makes contact with the flywheel and turns the engine over. But most importantly, when you're removing a Model T starter motor, you need to take your bendix gear off, otherwise if you try and pull the starter motor out with the bendix gear still attached, the back of the bendix gear will crash into the field windings on your magneto there, quite possibly at a very high risk of damaging them, and if you ruin your coils on your magneto, you're not going to be able to drive the car at all, unless you've got a battery. But we're avoiding that situation altogether by simply doing it properly in the first place. So we take the bendix gear off first, and then we carefully slide the starter motor out, and our magneto remains intact. So let's take a look at the old starter motor, and then we can get the new one in. Okay, so here we go. Two Model T Ford starter motors. Here's the old one, and here's the new one. It's done its duty well, but unfortunately it's going to need to be stripped down now and rebuilt. Not by me, of course. I'm not an expert in that field, but somebody will certainly have the expertise to be able to do that. Strip it down and make it into a good starter motor again. But being in a little bit of a hurry, I ordered this reconditioned starter motor from the United States, and we're now going to go ahead and fit this one. And I actually decided that it was probably easier to feed it in from the top. I'll spare you watching that hard part, but now what we're going to do now is very carefully feed the starter motor in through the hole, taking care not to damage any of the wiring on the car. I'm trying to bump the camera too. Carefully feed the starter into its home, and there we go, without nipping anything. And look at that, it fits just like I bought one. Let's get one of these bolts in the top here to make sure that it stays put. I do apologise for having my arm right in front of the camera. There we go, we've got one bolt holding the starter motor in place. I'll just do that up with a screwdriver a little bit more. Not tight, but just enough to hold the starter motor square so that we can put the other bolts in. Get this one in, and then of course I must crawl under the car again to put the bottom bolts in. Those ones, basically they're just finger tight. The starter motor can still wobble a bit. We just want those just to hold it steady so I can get the other ones in without cross-threading anything. Okay, so now that we've got all of the bolts back in, the new starter motor is on and done up tightly, we're going to go ahead and put the terminal back on. So we'll just pop that back out from behind the engine here where we put it. Here's our cable. Now what I went ahead and did before I started this video was just carefully wire brushed the terminal just to get rid of any grime off of it, sanded back this washer, and of course the nut as well. You can see that, probably just about see that glinting in the light there. So the reason for that is we want a nice good clean contact with the starter motor. So pop that on there. Actually, I could probably rough that up a little bit with some sandpaper as well. Get a better contact on that as well. So I have a piece of fine sandpaper here, just to gently rough up that contact. To make sure that we get a good clean contact so we don't get any electrical problems there. So we'll put the nut on and we'll tighten that up. Make sure it's nice and tight. Okay, so now that we have got the starter motor in place, we've got the power cord connected to it, the next step is to go ahead and reinstate the bendix gear. So, just a simple case, the skinny end at the end of this spiral thread here, at the end of this worm gear I should say, the skinny end goes onto the shaft, nice and straight. Just gently jiggle that into position, like so, and we'll turn that round to the side so that we can put in that tiny piece of metal I told you about before. That little key goes into that keyway there, and then we can put the rest of it back together. Okay, so I brought the camera closer, and this tiny little key in my hand here, we need to go ahead and pop that in that little slot, like so. And it looks like I might have to clean the slot out a bit first, because there's a bit of, oh yes, there's a bit of dirt in there, so we'll give that a clean first. Flathead screwdriver will do that job. Make sure that's nice and clean in there before we attempt to put the key back in. Actually, I think something like a Q-tip would probably be an advantage here, I think. Okay, so what I've got here is just a piece of rag on the end of a screwdriver. I'll just turn that shaft around a bit so I can get that screwdriver blade in there just to clean that slot out, because it must be clean. I just can't be having any dirt in there, otherwise the key won't actually sit in the slot properly. There we go, that looks much better. Okay, now we'll grab the key and put that in there like so. A bit of a tight squeeze, isn't it? Let's try it around the other way. Okay. Now it looks like the slot needs a little bit of filing on that face there. That might fit. We'll give it a try. I think I'll get a very small file. Just I think there's a burr on the edge of that slot there, so we'll clean that up first, and then we'll put the key back in. Okay, so as you can see, I've now got the key in the slot here. All it was on this back edge there was a tiny bit of a burr on the shaft, but that's okay. We clean that off, and now the key is nicely locked into the slot. Now what we've got to do next is grab this little guy here, which locks everything into position, and taking note of the slot on top of it here, and that goes all the way through, as you can see. That slot needs to marry up with the key there, so we basically just have to slide that on the same direction. And it is a little bit tight because that key is still a little bit tight, but we'll work with that. That's fine. So what we might actually have to do is just tap that key in just a little bit deeper. Just gently do. Let's just gently tap that key in. drop the other piece on the floor. Okay. Alright, so now that that's tapped in, this piece should now go on much more smoothly. So we'll slide that in there like so. Oh, look at that, just like I bought one. Probably spoke a bit too soon there. We'll give that a, I'll grab a hammer and we'll give that a gentle tap. So now that we've got this part on here now, we get that bolt that we saved earlier with the tag on it, this one here, and we need to get that into position. And as you can see, there is a tab on both sides, and this little tab here on the back tucks in behind this lug here. So we'll pop the bolt in the hole. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and put this bolt back in. We need to make sure that we turn the bendix spring back around to line up with that hole, like so. And then you'll notice this little tab here, that needs to lock in behind the spring there so that the spring doesn't turn. That sits in there just like that. I don't know if you can just about see behind there, that tab actually sits in that little gap where the spring comes around. There's a gap, and this little tab here fits in that little slot, like so. And then we do up the bolt, and I do apologise for my hand being in the way. Okay, that's all fallen into place nicely. We'll bring back our trusty spanner, and I do believe I need a 13mm or 1/2 inch, but seeing as a 13mm is all I've got, that's what we'll have to use. Okay, so you can see now I've got that that bolt done up all the way as it needs to be. And now the last thing to do before we put everything else back together, this little tiny tab here, we need to bend that back up against the face of this bolt here to ensure that that bolt can't undo itself. Because believe me, you don't want that happening. So what we'll do is I'll just grab the small hammer or a pair of pliers and just gently bend this back in up against the bolt. So I'll do that now, and then I'll show you the finished item. Okay, so to ensure that that tab is up nice and tight, we're going to bring in a pair of pliers and give it a squeeze, like so. There we go. So now you can see, if you look here, I'll try and bring the camera in close. You can see here that that tab is now up against the bolt, so the bolt can't possibly back out. Alright, so that's the bendix gear back together. What we'll do now is we'll go ahead and we'll put the bendix cover back on, and then we should be good to reconnect the battery and have our first starting test. Alright, so now we'll get the bendix cover here, which has still got our brake activation switch on it. That's okay, the brake light switch I should say, and we'll carefully work that in over the bendix gear. A little bit fiddly, but we'll get there. There we go, and I'll get that back sitting on that bottom bolt which we purposely left in place before we started. Let's see if I can spot it from up here. There we go. Okay, now we can go ahead and put the bolts back in that hold the bendix cover in place. So, somewhere safe to set those ones. Right there. Okay, we'll pop the top one in. Should get that lined up. There we go. Okay, so I had to pause the video for a little bit just to so I could get the last of these screws in. I'm just going back in now to tighten them up, and then we'll be ready to reconnect the battery and try out our nice new starter motor. I've just finished tightening these up, and this one over here. Okay, let's get the battery rehooked up, and then we'll be ready to test it out. Okay, so got the battery in, and once again what we'll do is we'll connect the positive terminal first. We'll give that a gentle tap into position. I'm just going to give that a gentle tap, not too hard. Obviously we don't want to tap it too hard, otherwise we could damage the battery itself. There we go, somebody, the previous owner of my Model T actually put the wrong size bolt through here, never mind. It seems to be a metric one, that's why. That's the positive side, and right, no sparks flying from the negative side, that's a good sign. Just gently tap that into position. There it is. That's better. And we can do up the negative side. And I'm keeping my hand underneath here so that the wrench doesn't come into contact with the positive terminal at all. Okay, that's our battery connected. Okay, so we've got everything back together. We've got the bendix gear back on the starter motor, we've got the cover back on the starter motor, we've got everything hooked up just the way it's supposed to be. It's now the moment of truth to see if the starter motor is going to do its job. This is, as they say, it. So we're going to switch the ignition over to battery. Make sure the spark is fully retarded as always. We'll open the throttle a little bit. I've already gone ahead and primed the engine before I started this shoot, so let's see if she starts on the starter. No, I haven't touched it yet. This is in fact the first time. So I'm going to reach down here and push the starter button and see what we get. Here we go. Oh, well, the starter works. Let's see if we can get the engine to run. A bit of choke. The engine is cold. I haven't started it today, so oh, I did that too quick. Let's try once more. Oh, now the starter motor works. Well, once again, and as always, thank you very much for watching my videos. I certainly would not have been able to do this without the support of all of my subscribers here on YouTube. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell there so that you get notified every time I put up a new video. That's about it for this one. I'm just going to go ahead and put all the floor pans back in. I don't think you really need to watch me doing that. Well, yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.